we will go to our second performance audit, which is improving performance management in economic development programs. And Carolyn Cato and Nancy Patino from the State Auditor's Office will be presenting remotely. If you would please introduce yourselves and feel free to jump in.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
We can, and your slides are up.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Carolyn Cato, and I'm a Senior Performance Auditor with the Office of the Washington State Auditor. I'm here today with my colleague, Nancy Patino, who is also a Performance Auditor. Today, we are presenting the results of our performance audit that looked at improving performance management of economic development programs at the Department of Commerce. Before we begin, we'd like to thank agency officials at the Department of Commerce for their assistance throughout this audit. The Department of Commerce is responsible for promoting our state's community and economic development. The Office of Economic Development and Competitiveness is the primary division within Commerce tasked with overseeing the initiatives and programs that help businesses increase and maintain their economic competitiveness. OEDC has 6 units that manage 16 economic development programs. Throughout this presentation, we will refer to OEDC as the division. We initially only planned to look at the performance management of the division's programs. However, we learned from agency officials early on that the division does not have an economic development strategic plan to guide their efforts, and performance management is inconsistent across their programs. Due to this, we decided to change our approach on the audit. Agency officials explained that they plan to work toward developing an economic development strategic plan and improving their performance management approach of its division's programs. We made the decision to conduct this audit to support them with this effort. The audit focused on identifying leading practices around strategic planning and performance management, and researching other states' economic development plans to identify useful examples. During this audit, we found that the division has opportunities to better plan for and measure progress on its economic development efforts. We also found leading practices and other states' practices that provide examples of planning and performance management for economic development programs. We had one question that we answered during this audit. Which leading practices can help the Department of Commerce improve performance management of its economic development programs? We identified 5 states and 1 region whose experiences informed our analysis in this audit. 2 in particular, Oregon and New Mexico, have examples included in our report. We found that the division has opportunities to better plan for and measure progress. Currently, Commerce is hiring a new assistant director to oversee the division. This person will be tasked with developing and implementing a statewide economic development strategic plan. The division also plans to develop an internal work plan that will help provide direction to program staff. This includes developing strategies its programs will use to meet the goals and objectives of the strategic plan and performance measures necessary to gauge the progress. We learned that most of the division's programs are administered through grant agreements and vendor contracts. To learn more about the division's 16 programs and current performance management efforts, we selected 1 program from the 6 units to review in detail, as well as 1 vendor contract from each program. We found that all 6 programs we reviewed had established goals and the majority set objectives. Only half of the selected programs we reviewed clearly outlined performance measures and targets to assess if they met their goals. We also found that most of the programs we reviewed used a document to track when contractors completed contract deliverables. Only 3 of the 6 programs we reviewed tracked outcomes and published a report or document with high-level results of what they achieved. Overall, Our limited review of the selected program showed that the division has some components that can support their efforts to create a strategic plan and performance management framework. Next, my colleague Nancy Patino will cover the practices we identified.
Hello, my name is Nancy Patino, and I will continue by sharing the leading practices and other state practices that we found. These practices provide useful examples of planning, performance management for economic development programs. These practices fall into 4 key categories, which include establishing an economic development strategic plan, including goals and objectives, monitoring and communicating progress toward goals and objectives, aligning their economic development programs with strategic plan goals and objectives and monitoring their progress, and including performance provisions in contracts and monitoring contractors. In the following slides, I will go into further detail of all of these practices. For practice 1, establish an economic development strategic plan, including goals and objectives. To begin with, strategic planning is a performance management process that allows an agency to determine what it would like to accomplish, develop strategies to reach its goals, and design metrics to measure their progress. Strategic planning includes several elements. The first one is to engage with organizations and other governments invested in economic development in the state. Doing so will help them incorporate community and internal business needs. This engagement might involve seeking input from businesses, community leaders, and potential customers. Next, they should also assess internal capacity and external challenges. Doing so can help them identify opportunities and challenges that will affect the agency's ability to accomplish its goals and objectives. For example, as part of Oregon's SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, they conducted focus groups, interviews, online surveys, and they also conducted a comprehensive analysis of the state's economic development landscape. They should also identify goals and strategies to achieve them. Establishing goals and objectives helps an agency identify what it would like to achieve, and developing strategies helps an agency identify how they plan to achieve those goals and objectives. And finally, strategic plan developers should establish performance management framework to assess progress toward goals. This framework should include developing performance measures, related targets, as well as short-term and long-term outcomes. The New Mexico Economic Development Strategic Plan provides a great example of a plan with clear goals, strategies, related performance measures, and targets. Here we have the example of New Mexico, of their goals, strategies, and related performance targets. The New Mexico had a goal to modernize their economic development ecosystem in their strategic plan. And one strategy to achieve this work is to work with local developers to create an inventory of properties that could be converted into sites ready for businesses. Their performance measure is the number of sites identified, and their performance target is 10 or more sites identified in the state. For practice 2, monitor progress toward plan goals and objectives and communicate results to key partners and others. An agency's senior management should regularly review progress of plan strategies and performance. This allows them to detect performance problems before they worsen. They can learn from their experience, replicate successful strategies, and improve on efforts that failed to meet their expectations. They should also revise strategic plans as conditions change. This could include changing strategies when reviews suggest that they are not achieving the desired outcomes. And it also allows leadership to scan the economic development landscape for emerging trends and make needed changes. For example, in New Mexico, they regularly update their 5-year statewide economic development plan from 2021. Earlier this year, they updated their plan to include new areas of focus because they had already accomplished many of their strategies. And finally, senior management should develop a communication plan to share progress with others. This communication plan should include the types of reporting they plan to do, and it sets out the timing and audience for their reports. For example, a common one is publishing an annual report that summarizes the agency's performance measures and outcome results. It could also include key achievements, ongoing challenges, as well as case studies and success stories. An agency's economic development strategic plan should be carried out at the program level. So for practice 3, ensure an agency's programs align with the agency's strategic plan goals, objectives, and monitor their progress. This means that at the program level, agencies should develop goals, objectives, and performance measures specific to each program, but that also align with the agency's strategic plan. And they should manage program performance through monitoring and evaluation. Here we have an example of New Mexico again. For one of their economic development programs, aligned its program goal for the job training incentive program with a goal in their 5-year statewide economic development plan. They had a strategic goal of building a skilled New Mexico through training and workforce development, then a program goal to provide training in order to furnish qualified workers for a new and expanding industries. To support their program goals, they also established a performance measure and target. The performance measure is the number of workers trained by the program, and the performance target is to train at least 2,000 workers. Finally, for practice 4, include performance provisions in contracts and grant agreements and monitor contractors. Agencies responsible for economic development must think strategically about how their programs make the most of limited funds. In the case of the division at Commerce, programming and funding are largely distributed through contracts and grants. State law and leading practices recommend that agencies adopt performance-based contracts, which is a type of contract that pays for the delivery of results rather than for specific services. Leading practices also recommend including contract provisions such as scope of work, deliverables and timelines, performance measures and targets, measurable outcomes, and language that ties payments to deliverables. Leading practices also recommend monitoring contracts, such as using a tracking tool to ensure that contractors are meeting contractual obligations, tracking how the overall program is performing, and identifying whether any adjustments need to be made to further improve performance. We looked at the division's contract and grant agreement practices, and the Associate Development Organization grant program in particular made really good use of these elements that I listed above in their contracts, as well as using an online system to track quarterly information to monitor contractor performance. As Carolyn mentioned earlier, the Department of Commerce Division of Economic Development intends to work on creating an economic development strategic plan. To ensure the greatest likelihood of success in their efforts, we made a series of recommendations that highlight specific strategic planning and performance management practices that the division should apply as its planning work progresses. These recommendations include seeking input from stakeholders in the planning process, analyzing internal capacity and external factors, establishing goals, vision, goals and objectives and strategies for their strategic plan, ensuring that program goals and objectives align with the overarching plan and develop relevant performance measures and targets, establishing a performance management framework, and developing a process to manage program performance through monitoring and evaluation. And with that, we welcome any questions that you may have for us.
Thank you very much. I want to start by saying that when I read the audit and the description of strategic planning, I felt like it was getting a textbook public administration course in how to do good strategic planning, and it's a great guide for any agency and the legislature. So thank you very much for that, in addition to its application to assist the Department of Commerce. Again, what we'll do is see if we have any member questions for you, and then we'll invite up Keith Swenson, Deputy Assistant Director for Office of Economic Development and Competitiveness in the Department of Commerce, and allow Mr. Swenson to speak, and then take questions and comments from committee members. So any committee members have any questions for the presenters before I ask for the Department of Commerce? Seeing any. Let me just ask for clarification or two. One is, because I do so much of my work in the higher ed and public education field, it was disconcerting, of course, to learn that there is no strategic management plan for economic development in the state. In your work, did you look at how, and I know there's some mention from other states about coordination with higher ed goals. Any discussion, thoughts? Did you see any relationship between Commerce having goals for economic development and how that translates into our workforce development and higher education needs, and where we put money from the state into those needs and how they may or may not be connected to economic development goals?
Thank you for that question, Chair. We actually did not look at that specific aspect within the audit, but that is a very good question, though, but that isn't something that was included in the scope to look at those other areas.
And in your discussion of, and your recommendations about the department should work with stakeholders in developing its plan, would that, based on what you've seen from other states, would the higher education, post-secondary education world be part of that, and including our apprenticeship programs?
We would definitely see that. Yes, most definitely. There was one plan that we looked at for North Carolina that actually focused just on looking at a talented workforce, and they specifically focused in on that area. So
thank you.
How to achieve that.
So not seeing any hands from committee members. So Mr. Swenson, would you like to join us at the table? Please introduce yourself, and you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the time. I really want to send my appreciation to the chair and members of the committee for hearing me in a bit of response, I suppose, to the audit report, which I will say very much up front that we agree with every finding in that report, and you'll see that in the agency's response as well. I won't go through all 6 of those recommendations, but I also recognize the chair's concern about a strategic plan. I do want to qualify that a little bit. The Office of Economic Development and Competitiveness Divisions focus specifically on small business entrepreneurs and the innovation economy through our big industry sectors, think aerospace, maritime, tech, and so on. And there's always been a bit of a focus in those areas around growth, retention, expansion, and tools for entrepreneurs to grow their businesses. That's always been in place, has been a guiding principle for the division. I think what we're at a great opportunity right now through some of the challenges that are already identified by the SAO when it comes to leadership changes, some of the funding changes within economic development as well, is taking an opportunity to work with all of our economic development stakeholders around the state to develop a plan, an intentional statewide economic development plan that includes regional development plans that are underway as well. Part of, I think, the strengths of OEDC is being a connector into that greater space of how are we intentionally providing resources into those areas and what are we trying to achieve when it comes to economic growth and supporting our communities. One of the key aspects to that is the agencies work right now in an agency-wide plan on their strategic plan as well. And so we want to ensure that our divisional plan is also in alignment with the agency too. So there's a lot of pieces happening together in conjunction to getting this accomplished, which we're all in favor of, and we know we desperately need. Our stakeholders are very much engaged on this as well, knowing the need that we need to create for the state. So all of that together has led us into where we are today, which is trying to drive into a plan. As was mentioned, we are hiring our new AD that will run the division. That will be charged with helping us get this accomplished. We've identified having this done mid-next year, given the resources we have, and we're excited to do that. So I really wanted to be available to actually be here to answer any questions and or thoughts or feedback into this plan and how the division itself is looking at implementing this and making sure that we do have a sustainable plan that is reviewed on a regular basis, much like the 5-year plan cycle that other states adopt too. We would like to do the same because the economics do change. The economy today is very different than the pre-pandemic economy that was our last strategic plan work that happened pre my time at the division. So being able to have a living document, a living exercise that keeps as updated as possible a strategic plan for the state is really critical in this space. So I wanted to be present, be available to share that we are very much in support of this. We appreciate the SAO's team and the collaboration we had in this work. A lot of what you saw there has actually been in movement and in practice in place since about February of this year. And so we're really excited to keep this really important work going. So with that, I'd be open for any questions.
Thank you. And do any of our members online have questions or anything you'd like to share? 3, 2, 1, no. I appreciate your appearing here in person. Kind of puts you on the hot seat because it is nothing short of stunning to discover that the state does not have an economic development strategic management plan. From the work I do in higher ed, post-secondary education, for example, immediately I see the relationship where we're trying to put funds and support programs to develop a workforce meeting our state's economic development goals, and to discover we actually don't really have performance outcome goals or an evaluation, so we might be putting efforts into developing programs, whether it's workforce certifications at our community and technical colleges or Career Connect Washington, or in post-secondary regional universities, which are disconnected and based on perceived needs from a decade ago. And that's very disconcerting to us, or it should be disconcerting to us, and it sounds like it is to the department. And that's just one sector. I know this, therefore, has got to be a very broad-based effort, and I'm interested in hearing how do you plan to involve the very numerous different sectors that it will take to have a goal, set of strategic goals and evaluations that, an evaluation system, I should say, that takes into account many different sectors?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because fundamentally it goes down to some layers here to recognize. So as the report said too, a lot of our program levels do have those very, measured outcomes that we look for. And what you're bringing up, which I love, the workforce component is a great example. And this is where I think from the divisional perspective, we need the agency strategic plan first, because the workforce system is greater than commerce itself. We defer in many ways to like the workforce board and other entities to be in that space, but we ask ourselves from an economic development point of view, workforce is a critical element just like housing is too. And siting and regulatory process of getting manufacturers in the state, they're all part of this greater conversation of economic development. It's probably one of the most wide breadth, topics you can have, which might be why we've had a bit of a disjointed system-wide or enterprise-wide approach to what are we driving towards. Our goals from a divisional, bring it back down into my little corner of that economic development world, is to potentially be that voice for the needs base of, say, workforce. We know our tech and quantum computing and other really important industry growth areas are going to need workers of that, next generation, for example, and skill sets to grow those centers of excellence all the way to pipelines into our medium to large industry companies, right? So it's not a solution answer, but it's a recognition of what you were saying is spot on. And I think my conversation with our stakeholders across the state, like our ADOs that are located in every county in the state, to our tourism entities and our EDCs and elsewhere, everyone's looking for that engagement and to be able to have that plan put together. And that's part of our framework for development of our economic development plan, is incorporating those conversations and those partners. And folks like the Puget Sound Regional Council, AWB, have all established their strategic plans too. Where can we fit in that to bring value add into those spaces that exist already, right? So there's a lot to be done in this space. I think that's why it's also a time horizon you saw in our reply into next year's, because it's going to take that level of engagement. And also resources. Pulling with each other, because there are limited resources in the economic development space. And so how can we partner together to get the outcomes that we want and identify what those outcomes should be?
Please don't apologize for giving a systems answer, which is what we need. And I think we understand the time horizon that's necessary for such an interdisciplinary approach that's necessary. I would like to ask if, as we've done with some other performance audits in the past, for Commerce to come back to the Joint Legislative Audit Review Committee next year to present your progress. And we'll talk to members with the department and executive committee of JLARC about that in the state auditor's office. But I hope that you'll be willing to come back to share your progress on this.
I know for OEDC, we would love to. Part of what we like to do is keep sharing what we do, because that's also sometimes of a challenge when you're doing economic development, is what are the mechanics and what are the programs and the work that you do that moves that closer to the goal line of what you're trying to achieve. So we would love the opportunity to share more about how the progress happens.
Thank you. And again, I'm just looking over to see if anyone has raised their hand. I'm not seeing any. Thank you for appearing. Again, thank you for the great work from the State Auditor's Office Performance Audit Team. Truly terrific job. And again, anyone who would like to, from the public, who would like to provide written testimony on today's agenda topics and the two audits we heard, can submit comments to the following email: jlarc@leg.wa.gov. That's JLARC, standing for Joint Legislative Audit Review Committee. It is on the screen here, at leg.wa.gov, or by mail to P.O. Box 40910, Olympia, Washington, 98504. And your written testimony will be provided to all the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee, JLARC members. With that, I think, Auditor Thomas, do we have do we have a meeting next month? We have a full JLARC meeting, I believe.
December.
In December, okay. And no.
I-900 in November.
Yeah. We do, okay. So we will hear mid-November from the State Auditor's Office on additional performance audits. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. And again, thank you to all the work by the performance audit team from the State Auditor's Office.